Introduction. The dawning of American imperialism. The Spanish-American War marked America's violent entrance onto the world stage as an imperial power. Lasting just 113 days from April to August 1898, this splendid little war, as termed by Secretary of State John Hay, fundamentally transformed both the United States and Spain while reshaping the geopolitical landscape of the Caribbean and Pacific. This 10,000-word account examines the war's complex origins, key battles, political maneuvering, and lasting consequences through multiple perspectives, from Washington politicians to Cuban rebels, Spanish officers to Filipino revolutionaries. 1. Spain's crumbling empire, economic stagnation, and colonial unrest. By the late 19th century, Spain's once vast empire was in severe decline. After losing most of its American colonies in the early 1800s, it retained only Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and a few smaller territories. However, economic stagnation, political instability, and widespread corruption weakened Spain's ability to govern effectively. In Cuba and the Philippines, nationalist movements grew, fueled by heavy taxation, trade restrictions, and lack of political representation. Spain's attempts to maintain control through repression only deepened anti-colonial resentment, setting the stage for rebellion. 2. José Martí and the Cuban Revolutionary Party's insurgency. Cuban poet and revolutionary José Martí became the ideological leader of Cuba's independence movement. Exiled in New York, he founded the Cuban Revolutionary Party, PRC, in 1892, uniting exiles, laborers, and intellectuals under the goal of a free Cuba. Martí organized an armed uprising in 1895, launching a guerrilla war against Spanish forces. His death in battle that same year made him a martyr, but his movement lived on. The insurgents employed hit-and-run tactics, burning plantations to cripple Spain's economy, forcing Madrid to respond brutally, escalating tensions with the U.S. through General Weyler's reconcentration policy and humanitarian crisis. To crush the rebellion, Spain sent General Valeriano Weyler, who implemented a ruthless reconcentration policy, 1896. Suspecting civilians aided rebels, Weyler forced rural populations into fortified camps, where thousands died from disease, starvation, and poor sanitation. Estimates suggest over 100,000 Cubans perished. American newspapers sensationalized the suffering, painting Weyler as the butcher and fueling U.S. public outrage. The humanitarian disaster turned American opinion against Spain and became a key justification for later intervention. Introduction. The dawning of American imperialism. The Spanish-American War marked America's violent entrance onto the world stage as an imperial power. Lasting just 113 days from April to August 1898, this splendid little war, as termed by Secretary of State John Hay, fundamentally transformed both the United States and Spain while reshaping the geopolitical landscape of the Caribbean and Pacific. This 10,000-word account examines the war's complex origins, key battles, political maneuvering, and lasting consequences through multiple perspectives, from Washington politicians to Cuban rebels, Spanish officers to Filipino revolutionaries. 1. Spain's crumbling empire, economic stagnation, and colonial unrest. By the late 19th century, Spain's once vast empire was in severe decline. After losing most of its American colonies in the early 1800s, it retained only Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and a few smaller territories. However, economic stagnation, political instability, and widespread corruption weakened Spain's ability to govern effectively. In Cuba and the Philippines, nationalist movements grew, fueled by heavy taxation, trade restrictions, and lack of political representation. Spain's attempts to maintain control through repression only deepened anti-colonial resentment, setting the stage for rebellion. 2. José Martí and the Cuban Revolutionary Party's insurgency Cuban poet and revolutionary José Martí became the ideological leader of Cuba's independence movement. Exiled in New York, he founded the Cuban Revolutionary Party, PRC, in 1892, uniting exiles, laborers, and intellectuals under the goal of a free Cuba. Martí organized an armed uprising in 1895, launching a guerrilla war against Spanish forces. His death in battle that same year made him a martyr, but his movement lived on. The insurgents employed hit-and-run tactics, burning plantations to cripple Spain's economy, forcing Madrid to respond brutally, escalating tensions with the U.S. General Weyler's reconcentration policy and humanitarian crisis. To crush the rebellion, Spain sent General Valeriano Weyler, who implemented a ruthless reconcentration policy, 1896. Suspecting civilians aided rebels, Weyler forced rural populations into fortified camps, where thousands died from disease, starvation, and poor sanitation. Estimates suggest over 100,000 Cubans perished. American newspapers sensationalized the suffering, painting Weyler as the butcher and fueling U.S. public outrage. The humanitarian disaster turned American opinion against Spain and became a key justification for later intervention. 6. McKinley's reluctant path to war. President William McKinley, initially opposed to war, faced immense pressure from public opinion, fueled by yellow journalism, business interests, Cuba's instability hurt U.S. trade, expansionists, e.g., Teddy Roosevelt, who wanted U.S. global power. After failed negotiations with Spain, which offered limited reforms, McKinley asked Congress for war in April 1898. Critics accused him of weakness. Others argued he shrewdly maneuvered into an unavoidable conflict. The Teller Amendment assured Cuba's independence, but the U.S. would soon replace Spain as the dominant power. 7. Spanish perspective. A dying empire's last stand for Spain, the war was a humiliating last gasp of imperial pride. Politically divided and militarily outmatched, Spain nonetheless fought to avoid the disgrace of surrendering its last major colonies. Admiral Pascual Cervera predicted disaster but followed orders, leading a doomed fleet to Cuba. The swift U.S. victory in the splendid little war, lasting just 10 weeks, confirmed Spain's decline, forcing it to cede Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines in the Treaty of Paris, 1898. The loss triggered national soul-searching in Spain, known as El Desastre, the disaster. 1. Dewey's daring voyage to the Philippines background. At the outbreak of war, Assistant Secretary of the Navy Theodore Roosevelt, acting in his boss's absence, ordered Commodore George Dewey, commander of the Asiatic Squadron, to attack Spain's Pacific Fleet in the Philippines. The voyage. Dewey's modern steel ships, including the flagship USS Olympia, sailed from Hong Kong to Manila Bay, evading international neutrality laws. His fleet faced logistical challenges, coal shortages, outdated charts, and the threat of Spanish coastal guns and mines. Risk and reward. Dewey's boldness reflected U.S. ambitions in the Pacific. A surprise attack could cripple Spain's navy and secure a strategic foothold in Asia. The Battle of Manila Bay. You may fire when ready, Gridley. The battle. May 1st, 1898. At dawn, Dewey's squadron entered Manila Bay and obliterated the antiquated Spanish fleet under Admiral Patricio Montojo. Dewey's famous order to Captain Charles Gridley marked the start of a one-sided slaughter. Key factors. Technology. U.S. ships had modern rifled guns. Spain's wooden vessels were outgunned. Tactics. Dewey executed close-range, circular firing patterns to maximize accuracy. Aftermath. Spain lost all its ships. 381 Spanish sailors died versus only one American from heat stroke. The U.S. took Manila by August, paving the way for colonial control of the Philippines. 3. Cervera's doomed Atlantic crossing. Spain's dilemma. Admiral Pascual Cervera knew his fleet, based in Cape Verde, was outmatched, but was ordered to defend Cuba. His squadron included the cruiser Cristobal Colon and 3 destroyers, all undermanned, underarmed, and plagued by mechanical issues. The crossing. Cervera's ships faced coal shortages, engine failures, and U.S. intelligence tracking their movements. Newspapers sensationalized his mysterious voyage, but the U.S. Navy anticipated his destination, Santiago de Cuba. Fatal arrival. Cervera reached Santiago in May but was immediately blockaded, a death sentence for his fleet. The blockade of Santiago, naval chess, match U.S. Strategy. The North Atlantic Squadron, led by Admiral William T. Sampson and Commodore Winfield Scott Schley, trapped Cervera's fleet in Santiago Harbor. The U.S. relied on reconnaissance, including a daring covert mission by naval constructor Richmond Hobson to sink a collier, the Merrimac, as a blockade ship. Patience. For weeks, the U.S. fleet waited, bombarding shore defenses while Army forces, including Roosevelt's Rough Riders, fought inland. Cervera's gamble. On July 3rd, under orders from Madrid, Cervera attempted a desperate breakout. His ships were annihilated in hours. 5. Technological disparities. Steel versus wooden ships. U.S. naval superiority. Steel hulls and armor. Ships like the USS Oregon, which sailed 14,000 miles around Cape Horn to join the fight, had advanced protection and firepower. Modern artillery, rapid-fire guns with longer range and accuracy, Spain's obsolescence, wooden vessels, many Spanish ships, e.g. Reina Mercedes, were repurposed relics with outdated cannons. Poor maintenance, chronic underfunding left engines unreliable and crews untrained. Outcome. The war proved the dominance of industrialized navies, a lesson global powers, including Germany and Japan, would heed. The chaos of Tampa mobilization, logistical nightmare. The U.S. Army, unprepared for large-scale war, descended on Tampa, Florida, a small rail hub with inadequate facilities. Disorganization, troops, including regulars, volunteers, and Roosevelt's Rough Riders, competed for scarce supplies, weapons, and transport ships. Political meddling. Officers like General William Shafter, elderly and ill-suited for command, clashed with politicians and journalists. Departure fiasco. After weeks of delay, ships departed haphazardly, with horses, men, and equipment mismanaged. 2. Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders, myth versus reality. Recruitment. Roosevelt, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, resigned to lead a volunteer cavalry unit of cowboys, miners, and Ivy League athletes. Myth. Glorified as dashing frontiersmen, but many were inexperienced, and their horses were left behind in Tampa due to transport issues. Reality. Fought on foot in Cuba, with Roosevelt's leadership and media savvy amplifying their legend. Legacy. Their exploits, especially at San Juan Hill, cemented TR's political rise, but obscured the role of black regiments, e.g., the Buffalo Soldiers. Third Battle of Las Guasimas, first blood skirmish in the jungle. On June 24, 1898, U.S. forces, Rough Riders, Buffalo Soldiers, clashed with Spanish troops under General Antero Rubin. Ambush tactics. Spanish forces used smokeless powder, hiding their positions, while Americans advanced blindly. Outcome, a U.S. victory, thanks to numerical superiority, but with 16 dead and 52 wounded, revealing the war's brutal cost. 4th, San Juan Hill and Kettle Hill, the making of legends. July 1st, 1898, the bloodiest day of the war. U.S. troops assaulted fortified Spanish positions near Santiago. Kettle Hill, Roosevelt, and the Rough Riders, alongside the Buffalo Soldiers, charged and seized the hill, though TR later exaggerated his role. San Juan Hill, a coordinated infantry assault led by General Jacob Kent, broke Spanish lines after brutal fighting. Media spin. Sensational reports portrayed it as a glorious charge, downplaying the disorganization and high casualties, 1,200 U.S. wounded, killed. 5. The Siege of Santiago, disease as the real enemy trapped Spanish. After naval defeat, Spanish forces in Santiago were surrounded but refused to surrender. Tropical hell, U.S. troops suffered from yellow fever, dysentery, and heat stroke, far deadlier than combat. Over 4,000 fell ill. Negotiated surrender. Spain capitulated on July 17th, but the U.S. Army's medical crisis and lack of preparation became a national scandal. 6. Puerto Rico's bloodless conquest, easy victory. In late July, General Nelson Miles landed with 3,500 troops, meeting minimal resistance. Popular support. Many Puerto Ricans, resenting Spanish rule, welcomed Americans as liberators. Aftermath. The U.S. occupied the island with almost no casualties, setting the stage for its annexation under the Treaty of Paris. 7. The Philippine Theater, Aguinaldo's betrayed revolutionaries, Filipino allies, rebel leader Emilio Aguinaldo, exiled in Hong Kong, was brought back by the U.S. to fight Spain, believing independence was promised. Fall of Manila, a sham battle, August 13th, was staged to let Spain surrender honorably without Filipinos present. Betrayal. The U.S. kept the Philippines as a colony, igniting the Philippine-American War, 1899 to 1902. Aguinaldo's revolutionaries became America's new enemies. 1. The Paris Peace Negotiations. The Treaty of Paris, 1998, formally ended the Spanish-American War, with Spain ceding Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the U.S. for $20 million. Cuba gained nominal independence but remained under U.S. influence. The negotiations exposed tensions. American expansionists sought a global empire, while Spain struggled to salvage dignity from defeat. Second acquisition debates. Imperialists versus anti-imperialists. The treaty ignited fierce U.S. domestic debate. Imperialists, like Theodore Roosevelt and Henry Cabot Lodge, argued for civilizing new territories, while anti-imperialists, Mark Twain, Andrew Carnegie, denounced colonization as hypocritical. The Senate narrowly ratified the treaty, marking America's shift toward overseas empire. The Philippine-American War, forgotten conflict. Filipino revolutionaries, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, felt betrayed when the U.S. annexed the islands. The resulting Philippine-American War, 1899 to 1902, was brutal. Guerrilla warfare, scorched earth tactics, and civilian internment camps killed 200,000-plus Filipinos. The conflict was overshadowed in U.S. memory, but set a precedent for 20th-century counterinsurgency. 4. Cuba's troubled independence. Though Cuba gained sovereignty in 1902, the Platt Amendment, 1901, let the U.S. intervene militarily and control Guantanamo Bay. Economic dependence and political instability followed, leading to future interventions and the 1959 Cuban Revolution. 5. Puerto Rico's colonial status. Unlike Cuba, Puerto Rico remained a U.S. territory. The Foraker Act, 1900, denied citizenship and self-rule, fueling debates over assimilation versus independence, a struggle persisting today. 6. The war's impact on Spanish politics. Spain's defeat triggered El Desastre del 98, a national identity crisis. Liberals blamed the monarchy and military, accelerating calls for reform. The loss also shifted Spain's focus to North Africa, leading to future conflicts like the Rif War. 7. America's new imperial identity. The war transformed the U.S. into a global power, with colonies in the Caribbean and Pacific. It also sparked debates over democracy versus empire, a tension defining U.S. foreign policy through the 20th century. 1. How the war shaped 20th century American foreign policy. The Spanish-American War marked the U.S.'s emergence as a global power, setting precedents for future interventions. The Roosevelt Corollary, 1904, justified policing Latin America, while the Philippine occupation foreshadowed Cold War nation-building. World War II and Cold War strategies, from gunboat diplomacy to regime change, traced back to 1898's blend of idealism and expansionism. 2. The USS Maine as the first fake news crisis. The sinking of the USS Maine became a prototype for media-driven war propaganda. Hearst and Pulitzer's sensationalized reporting, without proof of Spanish sabotage, whipped up public fury, a tactic later seen in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Vietnam, and WMD claims, Iraq. The Maine's legacy endures in debates over media accountability and government manipulation of narratives. 3. Contemporary reflections on American empire. Puerto Rico. Still a U.S. territory, its colonial status fuels debates over statehood or independence. Guantanamo Bay, a naval base since 1898, now infamous for post-9/11 detention camps. Philippines, a Cold War ally, but memories of 1898 to 1946 colonization linger in anti-U.S. sentiment. Scholars now frame 1898 as the start of America's liberal empire, promoting democracy while maintaining dominance. 4th, historical sites and memorials. Today, Cuba, the main monument in Havana, built by the U.S., later co-opted by Castro. Philippines, the San Juan Bridge skirmish site, where the Philippine-American War began. U.S., Teddy Roosevelt's San Juan Hill statue, criticized for erasing black soldiers' roles. These sites reveal how nations remember or obscure the war's complexities. He weighed a victory. The Spanish-American War lasted only 4 months, but its consequences lasted decades. The U.S. became a global power, its navy patrolling distant seas. Puerto Rico and Guam remain U.S. territories to this day. The Philippines would fight another bloody war for independence before finally gaining freedom in 1946. And Elias Caldwell? He never spoke of Cuba again. But sometimes, on quiet nights, he could still hear the bugles calling over San Juan Hill.